Welcome back to Profit Isn't an Accident. I'm your host, Shannon Howard, and today we're going to talk about something that makes you go, Most business owners I talk to are busy. They're booked out, they've got a great reputation, they're doing everything right. But when they actually sit down and look at their numbers, something doesn't quite add up. The profit doesn't match the effort, and it's usually not a sales problem. It's a visibility problem. I'm Shannon Howard. I work with HVAC owners, electricians, plumbers, and contractors to uncover hidden profit, fix those leaks, and help you keep more of what you earn. This is Profit Isn't an Accident. So I've been hearing something lately that I think we need to finally talk about, okay? And if you're in a season where your business is growing, right? I really want you to pay attention to this one. I am hearing from business owners who grew. Some of them grew a lot, you guys. Revenue increased. They brought on more work. They hired more people. They expanded the crew because obviously, right, if you're doing more work, you need more people to get that work done. And everything looked like it was in this nice fluid motion, moving in the right direction until it wasn't. And then now they're downsizing. They're cutting people. They're looking at payroll, wondering how the heck they got here. And they're realizing something that I wish more business owners actually understood before they hit that point. Your business can grow itself straight into a cash flow problem. Now, let me say that again. You can double your revenue and actually make your business financially weaker. Because revenue does not tell me whether your business can afford the company you're building. And this is exactly why I say revenue feeds your ego, but profit feeds your family. Because nobody wants to say, hey, you know what? We went from 600K to 1.2 million, and now I need to lay people off. And that's what I'm hearing. And that's not the growth story that we're sold. We're told that if we can just get more customers, if we could sell more jobs, if we can hire more people and grow revenue, eventually everything gets easier. But that's not necessarily what happens. Sometimes you just build a much bigger version of the same financial problems that you already had. So what happens exactly during growth? Let's say you're doing 600K a year. You're busy. Maybe you're even too busy. So you decide it's time to grow. You start taking on more jobs. Your revenue starts climbing. That's great. But you can't personally do all the work anymore. So now you need another technician. Now you need another truck. With that comes more insurance. With that comes more fuel, more equipment, and maybe somebody in the office, right? Answering the phones. Maybe now you need a project manager or maybe another software subscription. Maybe it's time you start thinking about a bigger shop. And suddenly the business that used to cost you $40,000 a month to operate now costs you $75,000. But here, my friend, is where owners get caught, okay? They assume the additional revenue will just automatically cover the additional infrastructure, but it doesn't. Not unless the work that you're adding has already had enough margin to support it. And not unless you understand exactly where your break-even point moved when you added all those expenses. That's the part nobody celebrates on social media. We hit $1 million. Awesome. But what did it cost you to hit $1 million? Because if you added $400,000 in revenue and you added $450,000 in cost to produce it, you didn't grow. You got busier and your business got more expensive. So growth changes your break-even point, and I don't think a lot of owners understand this. This is the number that I think a lot of owners actually miss. Every time you add permanent overhead to the business, your break-even point changes, right? So let's say your company used to need $50,000 a month just to cover everything. Then you hire, you add vehicles, you add management, you add software, you add insurance, you add office support, some maintenance. Now maybe you need $85K a month before you make $1 of profit. And that's a completely different ballgame. And if your sales happen to slow down, your expenses don't politely slow down with them. Payroll is still coming, insurance is still coming, truck payments are coming, your software is still drafting, your rent is still due. And that's when owners start saying, I don't understand. We're doing more revenue now than we ever have, but there's no money. I understand. Your cost structure grew faster than your profitable revenue. And that distinction matters. Not revenue, but profitable revenue. Because I can sell you $1 million worth of work tomorrow. And honestly, the business owners that I talk to and I work with, they are really good at getting the business in the door. But that doesn't mean we should take it all. So this is where job profitability actually becomes critical to you, okay? Especially if you're in the trades, right? Construction, another service type business. I need you to know what you're actually making on the work you're selling, not what you're charging, not what's hitting the bank account, not what QuickBooks says your total revenue was last month. But what are you actually making after the direct costs required to deliver that work? We're talking labor, materials, subs, equipment, whatever belongs directly to that job. Because here's what happens when you don't know. You sell more bad work, then you need more people to perform the bad work. Then you add overhead to manage all the, you know where I'm going with this, all the bad work, right? And congratulations, you have successfully scaled your profit leak. And that's why some companies feel worse at 2 million than they did at 800,000. The business got bigger and the underlying economics never got better. And then here comes the painful part, right? Because eventually cash gets tight enough that the owner realizes that something has to change, and something has to change in an instant. And usually the first place they look is payroll. Now we're talking about downsizing. And sometimes that absolutely is the right decision. I'm not going to tell somebody to keep a team their business can't support just because reducing staff feels terrible. But I also don't want you cutting people before you understand what actually happened. Because what if the problem isn't simply that you've had too many employees? What if your pricing is wrong? What if your labor utilization is terrible? What if your crews are spending hours every week driving back to the shop, back and forth, because materials weren't loaded correctly? What if your estimating is missing some significant costs, even small costs? What if change orders aren't being captured? What if you're sending your highest paid people to do work that could be handled by someone else? What if your scheduling is creating overtime that shouldn't even exist? And what if you're carrying unprofitable customers or job types just because you've always done them? What if you hired based on revenue instead of capacity and margin? That's the analysis that needs to happen before we decide the answer is simply just cut the crew. Because sometimes the crew isn't the disease. Sometimes the crew is the symptom. And this is why, I'm kind of heated in this one, to be honest, because I care so much about small profit leaks. Okay, this actually brings us back to something that I talk about constantly. Profit leaks rarely show up to you as one giant expense labeled, here is where all your money went. Wouldn't that be nice? Usually, though, it's death by 1,000 cuts. 30 minutes of wasted labor here, a return trip there, an estimate that's consistently a little low, materials that don't get billed, or an employee with no clear accountability. A job that should have taken 3 days, that takes 4. Overtime that has quietly slipped into becoming normal. A subscription here and there that nobody uses, a customer that consumes twice the administrative time of everyone else. Individually, none of these things feel catastrophic, but now multiply them across 5 employees, maybe 10 employees, 20 jobs, 50 jobs, 12 months. That's how a tiny operational problem becomes a massive profit leak. And growth is only going to magnify it. Now, that's the part I really want you to understand. Growth doesn't fix inefficiency, it multiplies it. So if you lose 3 points of margin at $50,000, that's $15,000. At $2 million, that's $60,000. It's the same leak, but a bigger company and a much bigger consequence. So before you add the next person, before you hire because everyone is overwhelmed, before you buy another truck, or before you add another manager, before you celebrate that next giant revenue milestone, I want you to ask a different question. Not, can we get more work, but ask, can our current economics support more work? Do we know our gross margin? Do we know our break-even point? Do we know which jobs are actually profitable? Do we know our labor capacity? Do we know what another employee has to produce in gross profit to justify the cost of bringing them on? And do we know what happens to cash if sales dip for 30 or 60 or 90 days? Those are your growth questions, because scaling isn't just figuring out how to sell more. It's figuring out how to grow without destroying the profit that you're supposedly growing for. So it's homework time. I want you to do something very simple this week. Look at the last 12 months of your business. Write down 3 numbers: your revenue, your total payroll, and your operating profit. Then compare those numbers to the previous 12 months. And don't just look at whether or not revenue is increased. Ask yourself, did profit grow with it? If revenue went up by 40%, but payroll went up by 60% and profit barely moved, I want you to pay attention. If revenue doubled, but you're carrying more debt and less cash, pay attention. If you added employees, but the owner is working more hours instead of fewer, pay attention. If you're doing more jobs, but constantly struggling to make payroll, pay attention. Those are signals. They don't automatically mean you need to fire people. They mean it's time to understand what the numbers are really telling you. Because the goal is not to build the biggest business you can. The goal is to build a business that actually works. And one that produces profit, one that produces cash, one that can support its team. And one that doesn't require the owner to keep feeding it more money just to keep that machine running. You don't need to grow for the sake of growth. You need profitable growth. And if your revenue is climbing while your profit is disappearing, that's not something to celebrate and hope eventually fixes itself. That's your business telling you to look closer, because profit isn't an accident, and neither is profitable growth. If this hit, there is a reason. Most businesses aren't broken. They just don't have clear visibility into where the money's actually going. So if you want help finding it, grab my free Profit Edge playbook or book a quick session with me. You'll find everything in the show notes. And if you haven't already, follow the show so you don't miss what's next.